Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. And can you hear me okay? Great, super. My name is Abby Norris Turner, and I'm the president of the American STD Association. And it's so nice to be here with you at this particular session at this conference. It's one of the best events that we do as an organization because we get to recognize our distinguished colleagues and their many achievements. So thank you very much for celebrating with us here. Before we get started, I wanted to make just a couple of announcements. So the first is to recognize Dr. Case Rietmeyer. Case undertook a real labor of love for ASTDA and for our field this year by spearheading an effort to produce a 50th anniversary issue of the journal STD. I spoke about this a little bit at the opening session, but I just want to remind you that there are printed copies of that one at registration. It's a really wonderful collection, dozens of essays that are focused on science, of course, but also failure and growth, mentorship, the role of the journal in professional development, and many other topics. So thank you to Case for doing that. Second, here's a picture of the journal. Second, and this is also related to the journal, ASTDA is hosting a drawing to give away 2 free memberships for 2025. So if you go to the QR code shown on this slide, you can enter the drawing, and we'll give those tomorrow at the closing session. You don't have to be here to win. And if you don't have a chance to grab this QR code, it's also shown on posters as you're exiting the room. And this is useful for everyone. If you're a current member, it'll cover you for 2025. If you're not yet a member, we look forward to welcoming you. And then the last thing I want to do is to recognize an important person who's in the room, Dr. Sevgi Aral. Sevgi was... Sevgi is a past winner of both the ASTDA Achievement Awards and the Distinguished Career Award, and she's a longtime champion of the importance of behavioral science in the STI field, and she's had a tremendous impact on so many of us. She was also a driving force in establishing this conference, the STI Prevention Conference, and growing it over many years to its current size and scope. So thank you, Sevgi, for your many contributions over your several decades of scholarship, and congratulations on your well-deserved retirement. And with that, I would like to welcome to the stage Dr. Bill Miller, the editor-in-chief of STD, to start our program.
Thanks very much, Abby. It's great to be here and see everyone. And my thanks also again to Case for the 50th anniversary issue. I really do encourage you. Can't hear me. Now can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. How's that? I'll just get shorter for a second. So I was just saying that I wanted to thank Case as well for his efforts in the 50th anniversary issue. That issue was really a joy to put together, and I know it was a lot of fun for Case, but it was also a lot of fun for us. And I really do encourage you to take a paper copy because think of it like a magazine that you can sit down and just read cover to cover. It's much better than reading the PDFs online. So I encourage you to take one of those. But that's not why I'm here. Why I'm here is to award the 2024 Best STD Paper by an early career investigator. Every year we recognize early career researchers with the goal of helping them develop their careers and encouraging people to choose this path of research in the STI space. So with that, let me begin. Our third place winner is Dr. Daniel McCartney from the London School of Hygiene, Tropical Medicine, and his paper is Acceptability and Usability of Self-Sampling for the Detection of Sexually Transmitted Infections among Transgender Women. The second place award goes to Mr. Christopher Dharma from the University of Toronto, Geosexual Archetype, Preventive Behaviors and sexual infections among high-risk men who have sex with men. Just a special note, in a way, he's my grand, my grand mentee. His mentor was one of my former students. And finally, the winner is Dr. Diana Tordoff from Stanford University currently, but the University of Washington before that, for heterogeneity in HIV, STI prevalence and prevention among the partners of transgender and non-binary people. Dr. Tordoff is on maternity leave, so she is not here today, but let's congratulate all of them with a round of applause.
Thank you, Bill. And now, Dr. Klausner.
Good afternoon. I'm proud to introduce Dr. Lao-Tzu Allan-Blitz as the 2024 winner of the American STD Association's Young Investigator Award. In a field with many outstanding young investigators, the competition this year was particularly tough. Lao stands out as an exceptional young investigator who has been making contributions to the science of sexually transmitted infections since 2016. He has published over 70 as of this morning, peer-reviewed reports in noted journals like the Journal of Infectious Diseases, Clinical Infectious Diseases, Sexually Transmitted Diseases, International Journal of STDs and AIDS, The Lancet, Journal of Clinical Microbiology, and the Journal of the American Medical Association, to name a few. His publications have covered topics ranging from syphilis in Peru to drug-resistant gonorrhea to HIV prevention, chlamydia and gonorrhea incidence in sexual and gender minorities, hepatitis B treatment, mycoplasma genitalium resistance, and more recently, Mpox, both in novel diagnostics in saliva and critically important policy piece on Mpox as a sexually transmitted infection. Lao's immense productivity, work in both the laboratory and the field, and gift for synthesizing complex epidemiology, however, are not his most critical talents. Those who know and work with Lao love him for his optimism, can-do attitude, and above all, kindness. Born and raised in Santa Barbara, California, Lao went to New York University for his undergraduate education. At one of America's premier and largest universities, he could not find a major that directly met his interests, so he created a new one, happiness. Little known is that Lao is a published novelist and recipient of the UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine Humanitarian Gold Award. It was at UCLA when I first met Lao and realized his amazing potential. Lao then went from UCLA to Harvard for his internship and residency, where, consistent with his insatiable curiosity and indomitable spirit, he completed a joint program in pediatrics and internal medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital and the Boston Children's Hospital, and earned his master's in public health at the Harvard School of Public Health with a subsequent fellowship in global health equity. Lao is now an instructor in medicine at the Harvard Medical School, associate epidemiologist and internist, Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Lao was recently awarded a 5-year NIH-K Award for early investigators with exceptional promise and outstanding research proposal. For those who know about NIH scoring, his score was a 10, the best possible achievable score. Without further ado, I'm very happy to present to you this year's American STD Association's Young Investigator Awardee and my friend, Dr. Lao-Tzu Allan-Blitz.
Wow. Thank you. What an honor to stand here. My work aims to address disparities in diagnostics for sexually transmitted infections in low resource settings. In Peru, I helped to develop an online calculator for predicting syphilis risk. And now I work with new technologies to create point-of-care tests for pathogens and drug resistance that we're working to implement in Botswana. It's so cool I get to stand here and share that with you. But I'm not here alone. I'm here with, because of, and for countless inspiring people all around the world. And I see this as a recognition of them. I see this as a recognition of my absolutely incredible mentors who have shared with me their wisdom, their guidance, and their data sets. There are far too many to name, but I'd like to specifically thank Pardis Sabeti for opening up a new frontier for me in bench research, Kevin Ard for supporting my growth in clinical medicine for patients with sexually transmitted diseases, Kathy Shu for grounding me in the centrality of the needs of the community, Ken Mayer for believing in me and pushing me to expand my focus, and Jeff Klausner for introducing me to the field of sexual health equity and creating in me the moral compass that still guides me today. I also see this as a recognition of my colleagues and my teammates on the ground in Peru and Botswana and many other places. They're the heart and soul of this work, and I'm so grateful to be in the trenches with them. And I see this as a recognition of my wife, Paria. She's been my rock and has created space for me to explore and to fail and to thrive. And finally, I see this as a recognition of the countless communities around the world with whom I'm privileged to work. The patients who suffer for lack of access to care or who face suffocating stigma for lack of a voice. I'm only just beginning my journey as a clinician researcher, but I hope to work in solidarity with these communities for many years to come. We need affordable, accessible, and equitable tests for pathogens and drug resistance, and we need them now for everyone. Thank you.
Congratulations, Lau. Dr. Lukart.
It's my privilege today to introduce Dr. Lorenzo Giacani on behalf of those of us who nominated him for the ASTDA Achievement Award, including Caroline Cameron, Anna Wald, Matt Golden, and Ned Hook. The Achievement Award, as you can see on the slide, is given to acknowledge an outstanding body of work or a single major achievement in the field, and Lorenzo qualifies for both. I first met him 20 years ago at a Gordon Research Conference on biology of the spirochetes. He was then a graduate student at the University of Bologna, and he and his then mentor approached me about having Lorenzo come to my lab to continue his graduate work. He arrived speaking a fairly modest amount of English and quickly became an integral member of the laboratory, and he worked longer hours than anyone else. After finishing his PhD degree, Lorenzo remained at the University of Washington as a postdoctoral fellow, joining the faculty and becoming an independent investigator. He's risen through the ranks and as of last July 1st, became professor of medicine in the Division of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and an adjunct professor of global health at the University of Washington. His extensive body of work includes the first transcriptional analysis of an important family of virulence factors in Treponema pallidum, the TPR family, the first description of transcriptional modulation of gene expression in T. pallidum, and the demonstration that the antigenic variation of TPRK facilitates immune evasion by T. pallidum, leading to the chronicity of syphilis infection. His most recent and groundbreaking accomplishment has been developing a method for genetic manipulation of T. pallidum, allowing investigators for the first time to look at individual genes to identify those most important for disease causation. For years, Lorenzo and another wonderful colleague in the lab, Arturo Centurion, dreamt of which genes they would examine when T. pallidum could finally be genetically manipulated. Although sadly, Arturo passed away before they could start this work. But Lorenzo's now leading these and many other studies, including collaborative work with many people in this room. In addition to being an accomplished scientist, Lorenzo's a loving husband and father, is a sought-after mentor, and is a generous colleague. I'm honored to introduce him to you today.
Thank you, Sheila, for the very nice introduction. And I want to thank the ASTA board member, Dr. Norris Turner, Julie Dombrowski, Arlene Senya, Khalil Ghanem, and everybody in the boards of directors. This is a huge, huge honor that I'm receiving today. This award has been given away since 1973, I think, and I'm very honored to be among the many recipients of this award, which I regard as the most incredible investigators that I've ever known. So I have 10 minutes. I just want to use this time to acknowledge as many people as possible, to tell you a little bit my story, how I got to study syphilis, and finally, I want to give everybody that wants it a gift. So this I mentioned already. There are so many talented investigators that got this award, and I'm honored to be in this group. My career started in Italy, of course, at the University of Washington, and I want to acknowledge my first PI, Claudio, that you see in this picture. In his lab, I was doing immunohistochemistry of breast cancer tissue slices, and it didn't have anything to do with syphilis, but I remember this experience very fondly because it taught me that everything that I was doing in the lab was extremely important, even if it was just making PBS or measuring the pH of a solution. And he also taught me a very important thing, which is what to me seemed like putting the primary or the secondary antibody on a slice of tissue for a patient out there meant possibly a good prognosis for her condition. And so he really taught me that there was a very good connection, very strong connection between what I was doing in the lab and what was happening out there in the clinical world. And I really treasure these teachings. But the first exposure I had to syphilis, not as a patient, but as an investigator, was when I joined the army and I started to test recruits for syphilis. And I realized that I didn't know very much about syphilis, and that it was a very interesting disease, and I wanted to study it more. And so what I did after being done with my service, I looked for a PhD program where I could study syphilis. And at that time, there was only one laboratory in Italy that had the animal model for syphilis, and that laboratory was led by Roberto Cevenini and Vittorio Sambri. That granted me the possibility of studying with them and moving my first steps in the syphilis research world. And I'm deeply grateful to both of them because, as Sheila mentioned, they allowed me to come to the University of Washington and join Sheila's lab and Arturo's lab. And the experience in Sheila's lab and Arturo's lab was extremely important to cement my intention to study, to keep studying syphilis. And and I'm very grateful to Sheila because, as she mentioned, when I came to the States, my language skills and research skills were really poor, and if I'm here today, it's because of her. Obviously, at the University of Washington, there is a critical mass of investigators that work as sort of additional mentors to your career. Here are some: King Holmes, of course, Wes Van Boris, Anna Wald, Christina Mara, Esso, Connie, Julie, Dr. Hansfield, Lisa Mannert, and Matt Golden, of course. The list is too long. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna go through quickly. Those are many of the people, and probably I missed some that I've been learning from. I want to acknowledge from this slide my lab, of course, the Grainger lab in particular, Nicole Lieberman, who recently joined the faculty at the University of Washington, and she's a very, very talented investigator. Again, I want to go on by acknowledging Caroline Cameron, with whom I work on vaccine development, and so many others. At the Sanger Institute, I want to acknowledge my colleagues, Jeff, of course, and this team in Peru, Oriol Mitia in Spain, and I want to acknowledge particularly Jody Dion, with whom I work on a syphilis in pregnancy study. And thank you, Jody, because I'm learning so much from you. I want to acknowledge the people at the CDC and the teams in Zambia and Cameroon that are recruiting samples for patients and samples for the syphilis in pregnancy study that is led by Jody. And finally, colleagues at University of North Carolina, Arlene, and UConn. And now for the gift. And I understand if there's no full appreciation because it's a gift from a nerdy, like, basic scientist. But as Sheila mentioned, like, one of the reasons why I got this achievement award is because we figured out a way to genetically engineer T. pallidum, and we were able to make gain of function and loss of function strains. The one you see on the left is a T. pallidum strain that is able to express the green fluorescent protein, GFP. And so it's very easy to visualize without any need for staining. And on the right is a loss of function strain that is attenuated because it's impaired in its ability to undergo antigenic variation. And as you can appreciate from the two pictures, if you infect a rabbit with this strain, you don't get really lesions compared to a rabbit infected with the control, which is on the right. And so my gift is, if you have a colleague or that really would like to have these strains to use them for their studies, they're available from us. And with that, I'll stop and thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo, on behalf of the room for that gift. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Roxanne Kerani, the recipient of this year's Jack N. Spencer Award. This award is presented every other year to a person with a long and extraordinary career in STI prevention, characterized primarily by outstanding commitment to program science, which Roxanne exemplifies. She has been a teacher, guide, and colleague to me since I began my career, and I know she is a valued collaborator to many in this room and people working in health department STI programs throughout the country. Roxanne received her PhD in epidemiology from the University of Minnesota and began her STI career as a postdoc fellow at the University of Washington in 2000. From 2002 to 2004, she was a CDC STD Prevention Fellow. She worked for Public Health Seattle and King County for 8 years, then transitioned to a UW faculty job in 2012 when she received an NIH Career Development Award. Throughout her career, Roxanne has been consistently dedicated to STI public health practice and to advancing the field through program science. She has been an extremely productive epidemiologist and researcher, as demonstrated by over 85 published papers on topics such as expedited partner therapy, HIV in African-born persons, STI partner services, and HIV cluster detection and response. All of this while creating a multitude of internal program reports for monitoring and evaluation. She has established and fostered ongoing partnerships with multiple community-based organizations in Seattle, including the Somali, Ethiopian, and Congolese health boards. She also provides capacity building assistance for epidemiologists and partner services teams at health departments. And in this role, she's worked with over 30 local and state health departments throughout the country over the past decade. I have had the joy of observing her in this role and learning from her work with a broad array of people in health department positions, from DIS and their supervisors, program leaders, and medical directors. She has a remarkable ability to listen closely, to stay calm, at least on the outside, and she treats everyone with dignity and respect. On a personal level, Roxanne is unfailingly collegial, humble, and gracious. She gets things done, she follows through on her commitments, and everyone wants to work with her. Nobody could sustain a career like Roxanne's without having their heart in the work. She is deeply committed to STI public health practice and improving health equity. In summary, Roxanne has had an extraordinary career in STI prevention practice so far, with much more in the future, and she exemplifies the qualities sought for this Jack N. Spencer Award. Congratulations, Roxanne.
Thank you, Julie. This is such an honor. I am so humbled to be here today, and I want to thank the ASTDA for recognizing me for this award. I was so shocked, as Abby will attest to, when I was told that I received the award, that I could hardly function for the next couple of days. So thank you all. I really appreciate it, and thank you all for coming today. I want to, in the spirit of it being campaign season, I want to take this opportunity to introduce myself to those of you in the room who I don't know. And to that end, it all started in a small town in Wisconsin, which is the home of the Wisconsin State Cow Chip Throw. That is where I started, and here I am today at the STI Prevention Conference. It's been a long and interesting journey. I'm going to preface some remarks about the things that I've worked on during my career with a few thoughts about program science, and then I have a lot of thanks to give. So I think that program science, for those of you who are in the room that maybe haven't been to many of these conferences or remember the work that the illustrious Dr. Sevgi Aral did in this area, program science is really a framework to think about how to build evidence to inform public health practice, whereby research informs practice and practice informs research. And I think academic health departments, such as the one that has been built at the University of Washington, are really uniquely poised to support this kind of work in building an evidence base, testing it, and seeing how it works. So Sevgi, thank you, and so glad to see you here today. The University of Washington and Public Health Seattle and King County officially, formally established their academic public health partnership in 2018. But this relationship had really been ongoing for much longer before that due to the work of Dr. King Holmes, Dr. Hunter Hansfield, Matt Golden, and others who really tried to use the opportunity to do research within our group at the University of Washington to make our health department a better place and do better work for the populations that we serve. This slide outlines some of the critical program science steps from a paper that was published in 2018, and I just wanted to highlight some of the work that I've done over my career using this framework as a way to kind of structure these remarks. So the next couple of slides show projects that I've worked on, along with some photos of students that I've worked with who have led some of these projects. And then I will move on to thanking all of the people that have helped me get to where I am today. On this slide, I have included several of the papers that I've written that touch on epidemiology, which is really a way for us to gather information about who is suffering, who needs services, where the gaps are, and where we can do a better job with our health department and public health practice. And here I want to highlight Dr. Diana Tordoff, who was the winner of the Early Career Investigator Best Paper Award, who worked on one of my papers with me. That's her photo on this slide. Another area of program science is interventions, deciding what we're going to intervene on, who we're going to deliver it to, and how we are going to provide that intervention. And most of my work in the intervention area has been in three key buckets. First, expedited partner therapy and partner services. Second, molecular HIV surveillance and cluster detection and response. And thirdly, the work I've done with our local African immigrant communities in Seattle to increase HIV testing in those communities and decrease HIV stigma. The third critical program science step is designing ongoing and iterative program monitoring. As Julie noted, we have a lot of program monitoring happening at Public Health Seattle and King County. But it's really important in that it informs our work and it tells us how we're doing. All of the projects that are highlighted on this slide have been led by students and written by students, including Mike Berry, who's in the top photo, who was a former DIS, and Eli Kern, who's on the bottom left-hand side, who now works for Public Health Seattle and King County. One of the really wonderful things about my career has been the ability to work with students, to expose them to public health practice, and to give them opportunities to see how the work that they do influences what we can do in the health department. Here I want to call out John Chung Lang, who presented his MPH thesis work today in the session before this. His photo is in the top row, second from right. So congratulations, John. Another thing that has been really rewarding to me over the course of my career, as Julie noted, is the opportunity to work with people in other health departments. I've worked with groups from other health departments through the University of Washington Public Health Capacity Building Center, which Julie led along with Matt Golden, through a more recent NASTAD and NCSD-supported Partner Services Learning Collaborative, as well as other training and capacity building assistance that we've provided from the University of Washington to other health departments. I've also worked with local and the state health department in Washington State, and I really enjoy the ability to work with people who are on the ground and who are looking for ways to collect better data and make what they're doing more effective and more efficient in preventing STIs and HIV. I also want to recognize the long relationships that I've built with many people who are a part of the STD Surveillance Network, or SUN, including the CDC leads, as well as some of my collaborators who are here in the room today and who I've enjoyed working with for many years. We're going on 5 cycles of SUN now. This slide is a reminder that we need to start taking group photos at our annual meetings. I looked, I asked people, I called people, and the best that I could do were pictures of all of us sitting and looking mostly at Mark Stanger over the years. So I apologize for that. Moving on to thanks, I have to give gigantic thanks to Dr. King Holmes, who was my first mentor at the University of Washington, and who really took me on as sort of an untested postdoctoral fellow and has supported me ever since. King really taught me about multidisciplinary collaborations and the fact that if you don't know how to do something, you can always find someone that knows how to do it, and you just have to find that person. King, as I think many of you know, also has a very playful side, and you might note that in the middle photograph on this slide, I'm holding a spirochete, which he grabbed off of one of his shelves after I suggested that we take a photo together a couple of years ago. I also want to give really heartfelt thanks to Dr. Matt Golden, who has been a mentor who brought me into Public Health Seattle and King County after I finished my postdoctoral fellowships. Matt has really seen me through a lot of ups and downs in my career And I think the thing that I learned from Matt is really the importance of relationships, of building relationships and maintaining those relationships. And Matt is not able to be with us here today because he's in Australia at the IUSD meeting. So Matt, to Australia, thank you. I also want to acknowledge my wonderful Public Health Seattle and King County and UW colleagues, most of whom are shown on the slide. I've missed a few people, Julie and Matt among them. They've been wonderful collegial relationships that I've really enjoyed having over time. Esso, Mina, I see you. Chase, I saw you somewhere. Thank you all for your support and your work over the years. I also want to note that the UW and Public Health Seattle and King County has been the root of some of my deepest and longest friendships. And the group really has become like a second family to me. Lindley Barbie, I'm looking at you here, although you deserted us, we still consider you one of our own. And so I just want to say that it's really been a privilege to work with this group of people and to be able to see all of the great work that we've done together over the years. A final note on this slide, if you look at the photo in the middle of the bottom row, that's Dr. Lisa Manhart in the penguin exhibit at the Georgia Aquarium. So for those of you who are going to the Georgia Aquarium for dinner tonight, you might also be able to have your photo taken in the penguin exhibit. Look for that. Finally, I want to thank my family who have supported me and listened and engaged in many conversations about syphilis and gonorrhea over the years. My husband, Kelly, my two children, Emery and Evan, they have unfailingly put up with all of my nattering on about STIs and HIV over the years, and I really appreciate them. I also want to acknowledge the support I've received from my parents, shown here at the lower left, who are both still in that small town in Wisconsin, which they've never left, still going to the state cow chip throw sometimes. I'm an only child. Neither of my parents went to college. And I think that when I announced to them, that I wanted to pursue my PhD and study STIs, I noticed that there was an exchange of worried looks between them. But I think that they've supported me all the way and have come to realize that this was really a passion, and I so appreciate them. Finally, oh, so bumped it. There it is. Okay. One last slide. As Abby or maybe Laura noted at the opening session of the conference, STI people are the best people. So thank you for being my people. STI people are also a really fun group of people. And on that note, I leave you with a picture of myself in a giant penis costume at one of our Center for AIDS Research holiday gatherings. At the University of Washington. Thank you so much.
Congratulations, Roxanne. Dr. Hansfields.
Greetings, everybody. I'm looking forward to making these comments, and I want to say a little touch of pride before I even start about the fact that 3 of the 4 awardees are my colleagues at the University of Washington. Lao-Tzu maybe someday. Let's see. How do I start with there? Slideshow. Excellent. So Connie Celum, a dear friend and colleague, got her bachelor's degree at Stanford in 1979, moved up the bay to UCSF For her MD degree, she achieved the Phi Beta Kappa and AOA, the medical school equivalent of Phi Beta Kappa at medical school, and then an MPH degree at when she came to Seattle a few years later. Her professional training beyond oh, I'm sorry. I've been telling you, yes, stay close to the mic. The acoustics are not great here. So she came to the University of Washington, she pursued her residency in primary care internal medicine track at UCSF, then came to the University of Washington at that time, still intending a career in primary care, I believe, as a Robert Wood Johnson clinical scholar in Seattle, and during that time became interested in STIs and matriculated as a fellow in infectious diseases with us in 1989. Her academic appointments followed in reasonably rapid succession. I think we'll all agree, all at the University of Washington, beginning in 1992 as an assistant professor, then associate professor, and then professor in 03. She, throughout that time, had an adjunct appointment in epidemiology as well. And when the University of Washington Department of Global Health was established in 2007, Connie was one of the founding and original faculty members. Staff positions, in addition to the academic ones, included from the start of her fellowship to be an attending physician, returning to some extent to her primary care roots in the main HIV/AIDS clinic at the University of Washington, what we call the Medicine Clinic, based at Harborview Medical Center. She, at the same time, became an attending physician in the Sexual Health Clinic. And from the years of 1992 to 1997, she was medical director of that clinic, while I had the privilege of being director of the overall SD program at the time. Connie's scientific contributions are much too long to summarize in any detail, and I think she's going to address those with us herself. This slide is more for the record. Don't try to read it all, but it highlights the 4 areas that those of us who wrote the letter nominating her for the Distinguished Career Award emphasized in that letter. Acyclovir suppression of HSV2 in an attempt to prevent HIV transmission. It didn't work, but it led to signal work in the pathophysiology and immunopathology of HSV2 infections by explaining why it didn't work. I won't go into that in any more detail now. HIV epidemiology and predictors in Africa, with emphasis on a number of findings that then led to her studies in Partners Prep, the international multi-center trial that was a tour de force of technology transfer as well as public health science that now has formed the international standard for practical purposes for HIV prevention in many of the highest risk populations worldwide. And probably the last is the one that probably most of you are most familiar with most recently. Connie has been the U.S. and international leader on the developing concept of and research showing the efficacy of doxypep. Other career benchmarks are significant, over 400 peer-reviewed scientific publications, 75 or so chapters, reviews, monographs, and the like. Training and mentorship, 60 or so trainees who have benefited from Connie's expertise, of whom the large majority remain over the years active in academia, public health, important NGOs. I've listed a very small selection of names that many of you will recognize in that category. She's a highly sought after speaker whose presentations are models of clarity and erudition. She has received numerous honors and awards. There's a typo on there. Her ASTDA Achievement Award was in 2011, not 07. But she also was one of 10 folks listed as leading one of the top 10 medical breakthroughs by Time magazine back in 2011. And she has given the very highly prestigious John F. Enders Lecture at the Infectious Disease Society of America annual meeting. Personally, I don't think there's ever been a Distinguished Career Awardee who's more popular and more likable as Connie. Everybody who knows Connie just comes to adore her. She has friendships galore, relationships and family to emulate, and I need to highlight one in particular and a shout out to neonatal intensive care unit nurse Linda Summers, Connie's life partner. As it says here, she provides balance, keeps Connie grounded, and is sometimes successful in limiting Connie's after-hours time on the phone and the computer. Thank you, Linda. Finally, a sort of personal note of congratulations. Over 20 plus years, 30 years almost, Connie has been part of a core group of many of us who have traveled the world together, and many of you will recognize, if you had time to leave the slide up longer, which I don't, many of the people in these photos who have enjoyed our time with you, Connie, at a personal and social as well as collegial and professional level. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the 2024 recipient of the American STD Association's Distinguished Career Award, Connie Kellum.
Thank you, Hunter. That was truly lovely. And Linda, you did not have authorization to share a few of those photos. I feel like because I know the audio there's a lot of echo, I should ask instead of can you hear me? Can you understand me? Is it okay? Okay. Well, tell me if that changes. So I decided in the approximately 20 minutes that I have to try to tell you kind of a little bit about the roundabout roadmap that I've taken over the last years to try to go through generating evidence to also learning about implementation in both HIV and STI prevention. And here's a lovely picture of Seattle on a rare sunny day. And I just want to call out, when we joined the Department of Global Health, I felt like we needed a logo. And in the back of a taxi cab, I thought, really what this work is about is partnerships. And so the taxi cab driver allowed me to take a picture with his hand, and we made a logo. But it's really about partners in prevention. I want to really thank those who nominated me for this honor. It was unexpected, and I very much appreciate it and appreciate ASTDA for choosing me. And just want to particularly thank Hunter and Tom, Sevgi, Sharon, Ned, Sheila, and Anna. And really appreciate some people who made the trip to come to Atlanta for this. And then I want to thank my parents and my partner Linda for their many opportunities. I know it's become kind of de rigueur to talk about privilege, but I do genuinely feel like I've had a privileged life. My parents both instilled in me an appreciation for and a desire for education, but also impact. Somehow, I think they were in their must be 40s or 50s in this photo. They were still smiling after raising 5 children, one of whom was exceptionally headstrong. And the picture next to that is my father, who took a bicycle trip through post-World War II Europe on a very cheap budget. And unfortunately, I can't find the picture of him next to a big syphilis billboard, but there is some inherited aspect to the work I'm doing. And then Linda, thank you so much for staying the course over the last 2 decades. Linda and I got together right as I signed on for my first multi-center trial, and I had no idea what I was getting into, and she was very patient as I traveled and took on more than I really could bite off. And then my dog, Theo, gets a place of acknowledgement because he has put through, in his 14 years, numerous conference calls, which he still doesn't understand. And and many of them are at early hours to Africa. So thank you. Every journey has different stages. I just wanted to reflect on the beginning. And I had the fortune as an undergraduate of hearing Phil Lee give a lecture, and I thought, health policy, that's where I want to go. And did an internship for a year where they took on a punk kid who didn't know the difference between Medicaid and Medicare to try to understand how to save California Medicaid money, and it was an amazing journey. But then I went to medical school and stayed on at UCSF for residency. And this is when AIDS hit in San Francisco. And the picture, which is for those worried about HIPAA, it's a stock photo, but that is what rounds was like in those days, where you would admit people and they often would die within a few days. And they had to come out, deal with death and dying from a disease that we didn't understand. And it was during that time that I sort of shifted from an initial interest in health policy to more epidemiology and infectious disease. Just want to say, I mean, it's probably almost trite, but to say how people and experiences shape us substantially. And we have to, be willing to course correct, if you will, as opportunities open up. And opportunities open up through mentorship. So Philly, I mentioned, was a lifelong mentor of mine and didn't hold it against me that I didn't stay in the area of healthcare financing. And then Hunter and King, when I came to Seattle, were two people who I think I just want to call out for their ability to take what I would describe as a bent arrow and accept that I wasn't going to have a linear path. And that a key thing for those who are young and still, at that stage of defining their interests, so important to find mentors that you respect, believe in you, and open up opportunities and have patience. And the patience has to do, because some people are like incredibly linear and know from the beginning what they want to do, but it's to find your focus and to follow your compass. For me, after watching way too many, primarily at that stage, young gay men die from AIDS, I felt the sense that I needed to really focus on prevention. There wasn't a lot in our prevention toolkit at that point, but I felt that was the thing that drove me and continues to drive me, with a very kind of pragmatic approach to want it to be able to be scaled and to ideally have an impact and to reduce new infections, both HIV and STI. Sort of maybe again with a nod to my parents that I think they helped me have good instincts. This one was rather obvious, that one can't do this kind of work by yourself. And it really, truly, truly does take interdisciplinary team science, as Roxanne said. And for me, that meant recognizing all my limitations, which are many, in epidemiology, that I didn't really know how to do clinical trials. I'm not a behavioral scientist. I'm not a biostatistician. As Essa will tell you, I barely understand antimicrobial resistance. And that community engagement is important, so that when you do site visits, listen, observe, and engage. And then if you are lucky, and I have been, to have some things that work, learn how to implement and learn how to study implementation. So I'm just going to use a few examples. And I honestly, I have to, in full disclosure, tell you, when I started working as a faculty member, I said I didn't want to do research. I was on the clinician teacher pathway because I didn't, lo and behold, I did not want to have to be dependent on grants. But it sort of drew me in because the questions were there and they begged answers. And remembering that this is now back in 2000 age, there was so much data from, at that point, 20 plus years about the epidemiologic synergy between, in this case, not just STIs, but herpes simplex and HIV. And in partnership with Anna Wald, we decided to try to see whether these epidemiologic findings would really translate to interventions. So one set of observations had to do that people who had herpes, as those in this room know so well, reactivated. And when that made such intuitive sense that that would increase HIV susceptibility, but also infectiousness. And so it was this synergy that went around and around, and the math modeling at that point suggested that as many as a third of new HIV infections in Africa could be attributed to HSV2. And we didn't know, well, honestly, we suspected, but we didn't have drugs at that early stage that were so tolerable for HIV itself. So there's a real, it was before we knew about PrEP, before we knew U equals U, although the Rakai data suggested it would work. So we wanted to ask the question, since we didn't have a herpes vaccine, could antivirals sort of reduce this this attributable fraction? So that led us to two hypotheses. And one was, well, okay, HSV2 increases susceptibility. So if you could find people who are at risk of HIV exposure who had HSV2, could you suppress herpes sufficiently to reduce their susceptibility? It sounded so easy. Who cares? 2 pills a day. We weren't worried about that. I mean, it was pretty naive in some ways, like telling people you have a virus in many cases you don't know about. We're going to ask you to take a pill twice a day, not just once a day, to suppress this virus that you haven't heard about, to avoid another one that you don't want to think about. But we somehow convinced reviewers, before I had ever been to Africa, to fund us to do this trial, which we did in collaboration with the HPTN. And we enrolled about 3,200 persons who were willing to be randomized to acyclovir twice a day or placebo, and measured HIV incidence as the outcome. And this is when you feel like, can your life really be reduced to one slide? But at times it feels like, yes, it can. Because 4 years later, after believing in the hypothesis so much, even if I didn't have an MPH, I would tell you those curves totally overlap. And then the hazard ratio just confirmed what we could see with our naked eyes, that no difference. But meanwhile, the Gates Foundation, also willing to take a chance, at the same time had asked us, well, we'll fund you. I mean, it was a different era in terms of funding in the Gates Foundation, but they basically encouraged us to ask the parallel question on infectiousness. And again, I had not been to Africa. We had 2 weeks to write this grant. It was a total work of fiction, but somehow we were funded. We ended up in 14 sites in 7 countries, recruiting HIV serodifferent couples where the person with HIV also had herpes, where they had a high enough CD4 count that they weren't eligible for ART by national guidelines, and again, randomized to acyclovir 400 twice daily or placebo. And in this case, had to follow couples for 2 years. So it was even harder than I imagined. And then about a year after that prior flat curve, we got this curve, which again, you don't need an advanced degree in biostatistics or epi to say didn't work. But this time we had a surrogate marker. We knew that actually the acyclovir did something. It wasn't inert. We reduced viral load by a rather meager quarter log. And so there was some signal there. So the challenge, and they don't teach you this in your MPH or PhD programs necessarily, that the real, a bigger challenge than a positive result is making sense of flat results. And I'll come to that in a moment. But first, I will tell you just what you also don't get to see in that one slide summary is what incredible effort it took to recruit couples. The foundation, when they told us they would fund this couple study, said, we'll fund you if you tell us you can do it for $10 million less and do it in 1 year less. And I naively, standing in the airplane aisle when the Larry Corey and I were talking to them, said, okay, sure, no worries. Had not been to Africa yet, still. So the amazing work of sites is reflected in this. Trying to get a couple where there's such stigma, remember we're talking early 2000s, to test for HIV together, and there's such sexual and other dynamics between couples was not trivial. And sites did so many creative things to screen probably 50,000 couples to identify those 3,400 couples. Amazing. And so you probably can't see it, but on the top right, like in Thika, Kenya, they had these huge puppets. They would go into marketplaces to try to encourage couples to test. We collaborated with 14 sites in 7 countries with very talented senior and young investigators. And we didn't have time to do site selection other than having a meal with someone and saying, you with me? Will you do this? And will you mentor someone? Because a lot of them were senior investigators. Is there someone who's young, hungry, and who will walk the long walk? It required building substantial infrastructure at UW. I was so naive. I had no idea about subcontracts or anything, but we had to make a lot of them to these 14 sites, ethics reviews, translation, back translation, quality control reports. 2 million samples were collected and archived, hundreds of site visits, and literally thousands of conference calls in the era where we didn't have cell phones, and 9.8 baud modems, which took about 3 minutes per email. But the best part of this was the capacity building, because those young investigators became not so young anymore, and they're doing their own work. And I was thinking about it last night. It's like they were willing to walk this walk with me and others, and invest their energy, and then by investing in them, they became independent and able to do very impactful work. But going back to the flat results, because that still was bothering me, and it just seemed like I wasn't willing to believe that our hypothesis was wrong. Again, rather stubborn. We had no real objective marker of adherence because of the short half-life of adherence. But then someone in Seattle, working with Larry Corey, did a very simple little experiment by doing biopsies at the beginning of a herpes lesion and then serial over time compared to a normal part. And I'm sure you can't see that, but if you trust me that there's an area of green, those are CD4 cells, CCR5 CD4 cells, and they persisted for out to 12 weeks. And this is in someone who had been on standard dose treatment for acyclovir. 12 weeks later, they still had this influx of inflammatory cells that are the mechanism by which herpes increased susceptibility. So yeah, we could shut down the virus, but we didn't shut down the mucosal inflammation. Bummer. And then we also did a study, and Kenneth Mugwanya led this study in Uganda, where we wanted to know, okay, did we just use too low a dose? And so we pushed the dose to like herpes zoster doses of valacyclovir, 1 gram TID, and yes, we could get to a point of reducing HIV viral load by a log. Bummer, but we didn't know that at the time we designed the trial. So that sort of was a pivot for us, and honestly, I think for the field a little bit, is we need to be more direct. We don't have the tools yet, but I'm glad NIAID is still funding work in this area to get better tools for herpes. So we started focusing more on HIV susceptibility and infectiousness. But every study has opportunities, and what the opportunities led to probably 50 papers about other things we learned, including that ART was very potent. So that in the observational analyses, as people became eligible for ART as their CD4 count dropped, they would go on ART, and when we did a retrospective analysis, we found that ART was associated with a 92% reduction in transmission. And the only transmission that occurred, and we matched it to know who transmitted to who, was in someone whose viral load was coming down. We learned about pregnancy, hormonal contraception, inflammation, genital viral load. So when you plan clinical trials, plan sample collection and analyses to learn other things too. So then question 2 was, can pre-exposure antiretrovirals used as PrEP prevent HIV acquisition? And this is something that came up as we were finishing the herpes trial, that there was a real interest in studying now more tolerable, safe drugs, including tenofovir. It was potent, it was rapidly active, it was safe. We had a lot of experience from treatment that it was well tolerated, easy to use, not twice a day, once a day, no, and few drug interactions, in an animal model that it should work. So we kind of went into it with a sense, okay, well, we'll do it. And I really want to call out Jared Baton, who is my co-PI in these studies, to ask the question, could a pill a day, either single drug tenofovir or co-formulated with emtricitabine, prevent HIV? So again, distilling that concept to a study design, sample sized increase, because now we're treating ART earlier. So we're now looking at, we enrolled about 40, we collectively enrolled 4,800, almost 80 HIV serodifferent couples, randomized, in this case, the negative partners to tenofovir once daily, or co-formulated with emtricitabine or matching placebo, and followed the couples for 36 months. We had learned a lot from the prior herpes studies about which sites could mobilize couples counseling, so we focused the trial in 9 sites in Kenya and Uganda. Amazingly, and 4 of those were new to research. They had never done a clinical trial. Tasso wanted to learn it, and we said, let's do it. So they screened almost 8,000 couples who were HIV serodifferent and enrolled about almost 4,800. The retention was high. Adherence by pill count was extremely high, but even by drug levels was high. We had 82 HIV seroconversions and found a very highly significant reduction of close to about 70%, with similar efficacy in women and men. And this is what the curve is you want to see when you do these trials. You don't need a PhD to say these curves separated, and they separated early. This is at our interim DSMB, where someone brought a box of Wheaties as we celebrated, like, wow, finally a positive result. But we weren't the only ones doing the trials. We were one of 6 efficacy trials, and while 4 of them showed efficacy, 2 did not. The 2 in young African women, called Voice and FemPrep, where adherence was low. And so, you are in a bigger fishbowl. Your results get interpreted with other trial results. And we were thrilled that FDA approved the medication in 2012. Time picked it up. But most valuable was the Kenya Daily Nation said that our scientists have done us proud. But we, again, more lessons learned, that it's so worthwhile to build clinical research capacity. As I said, 4 of the 9 sites and Partners for PrEP were new, one of which this was under an IND, one of which, palpitation moment, was selected by FDA for a site visit and had no findings. So kudos to Tasso. That's what clinical capacity looks like, development. A bombed out looking building in Tororo that became a beautiful clinical trial site and is still doing research. But these trials, this is team science. It takes a village. It takes so many people. They have to be committed. They have to, you don't know what you're going to find. This is a small portion of the team. And the other part is, like, maybe because we had so many flat results in HIV prevention that we weren't prepared for success. And you have to be, it's the hardest thing, I think, is to be prepared for flat results, Janelle. Been there, done that, as well as success. And if you are better prepared, it expedites the transition to implementation. But you also have to be prepared for skeptics and critics. I can't tell you how many people said at the time, people should just use condoms. Why do you want to use our good drugs for treatment to prevent infection? And then because of the two flat trials in women, they said young women cannot take a pill a day. That really drove me crazy. And then they, and I understand these are very overburdened health systems, but they said health systems can't afford it or can't deliver it. So you just have to take a deep breath. It's not about you. You just be patient and figure it out. So it's not just about efficacy. You also need guidelines. That takes time. I was so impatient. I thought, let's move, let's do it. After all these decades of waiting for effective prevention. And so you need guidelines, but you need political will and funding. You need demand creation. Some really creative examples from Kenya, Seattle, and Chicago here. But you also have to recognize this is still stigmatized behavior, and I don't think I appreciated that during the trial, that you're asking someone to take a pill in a bottle that looks identical to treatment, to take it daily with high enough adherence to benefit. You have to simplify delivery, and we over-medicalize PrEP so much in the beginning, like worrying, fussing about renal failure. And if you have to keep the end game in mind, that if you're going to have an impact, you have to get high coverage. You have to make it simple, you have to make it attractive, demand creation, and you have to we didn't know very much, honestly, when we worked on this concept about what we were asking people to do. This is like people do not want to spend their time thinking about, am I going to get HIV? But you kind of do every time you take a pill, right? So the last decade plus, a lot of people in the room and in the field have worked on trying to optimize product choice. We now have a daily pill. Thrilling news that we have 2 effective injectable ones and less effective but still potentially important vaginal ring. We're working with others on a monthly pill. But let's remember, and I didn't really understand this until later, that there were so many analogies between daily oral PrEP and daily oral contraceptives. 50 plus years ago, and I recommend this book, The Birth of the Pill, we learned a lot of these lessons. And then the contraceptive field taught us about contraceptive choice. And that, if you look at the data from many studies, oral contraceptive pills don't have very good pregnancy prevention because it's hard to take something daily. So we have to find better approaches. So I am particularly excited about the pipeline of new prevention products because it will offer additional options, recognizing that no formulation is going to work for everyone. But again, end game in mind, it's not just about efficacy. We need choice and we need high coverage. So the last decade, we and others have worked on a lot of studies to try to learn how to improve PrEP uptake and use in young women. Lastly, and I'll finish soon because I know we are getting close to time, is the doxycycline story. And this was, so I feel like my career has been both STIs and HIV, and I felt kind of responsible when the herpes trials didn't work because it felt like it took some of the steam out of the looking at STI interventions for HIV prevention, but we clearly needed them just for STI prevention with these alarming data. And there were preliminary data suggesting that doxycycline might work post-exposure. But there were also questions, and you sort of have to go into this with equipoise. And in collaboration with Annie Lukemeyer, who's in the audience, and thank you, Annie, we designed a pragmatic open label study to try to ask that. And we're thrilled, again, that it worked. I mean, honestly, I didn't know if people would want to do this, would be able to do it. It could be the acyclovir story all over again. But it did work. And it was, I still remember that DSMB meeting, like, are you sure? Really? It worked? But 2/3, and works better for chlamydia and syphilis. We kind of predicted that. And again, it was a status neutral approach. Our study enrolled both men with and without HIV, and it was really exciting. So you know, a lot of people were like, oh, but, and we've heard about it here, but is this a good thing? You know, I think that it's, again, maybe think of it as a first generation intervention while we work on STI vaccines. It's not perfect. Daily oral prep was not perfect, but people want it. And I think there was a session yesterday where very encouraging data that people, you know, we can't just put the genie back in the bottle and say just use condoms. It's not going to happen. And some of the qualitative work, which again I think is so important to nest into these studies, showed that this really was a benefit that people valued. But we're not deaf. We understand it. There's a lot of concerns about is there harm and will it lead to more antimicrobial resistance? And I'm not going to go through all this in the interest of time. So far, signals aren't bad, but we get it. These are studies with a maximum of a year of follow-up, and they weren't, you know, you might think they're really like your pristine randomized controlled trial participants, but these were, people had a lot of things going on in their lives, and we do need more generalizable data, but I just want you to understand these were not like the people who didn't have issues with homelessness and other things going on. It is going to be hard to answer these questions, but we're convinced they need to be answered to get the net benefit about doxy-PEP. Really exciting data coming out, and some of it here, some of it at Croy. And hats off to our colleagues in San Francisco, Oliver and Stephanie and others, who have looked at a population level, and even with all the limits of ecologic analyses, there appears to be trends in reductions, particularly in chlamydia and syphilis, and not just in San Francisco. We heard data yesterday from other places as well. And hats off to CDC, because they, you know, this is controversial. There's some providers who are very nervous about doxy-PEP, but they came out with guidelines with an A1 recommendation. And one of my favorite quotes is from Samuel Johnson: "Nothing will ever be attempted if all possible objections must first be overcome." And he said that about 3,000 years ago. No, 300, sorry. I told you I wasn't a good epidemiologist and I can't even do basic math. So we're now taking on trying to understand implementation with a larger group and trying to understand both effectiveness and antimicrobial resistance in Atlanta, Detroit, Miami, San Francisco, Seattle, and thank you to those in the room who are walking this walk with us. And I'll just end with a few take-home messages. First, about research. Pursue questions that you're passionate about. I still am passionate about HIV and STI prevention. Find and follow your compass, build capacity because it takes a village. This is one I feel so strongly about. Work with people you trust, respect, and enjoy, because you're going to spend a lot of time with them, and sometimes they need to make you laugh or you need to cry, but it's just like you've got to work with a team you can really trust. Enjoy the process because you have no control over the outcome, and you're probably going to have surprises. The arc from evidence to implementation is certainly not linear. And don't give up. And this is one of my favorite posters from Kisumu, Kenya, never say die. But I also wanted to just end on messages about leadership. And this is where mentors are important too. Do not be afraid to think big. Say yes before you think you're ready. Leadership, in my definition, is about having an impact on people's lives. Press on, be persistent and tenacious. Embrace challenges and change. Find people who inspire you. And anyone who knows me will know what the next person is going to be. Amanda Gorman. She's one of the people who inspire me. You, I'm sure, heard her at the inauguration. I really encourage you to read her book, Call Us What We Carry. The name of that book is about the microbiome, believe it or not. And one of my favorite quotes is that talking about motivation from a poem called Resolute is, "We will not stir stones." Who would want to do that? "We shall make mountains." And it takes that kind of determination to have an impact. And then lastly, I just want to thank the many, many people who have been part of this walk for me. It's been an amazing journey. And my favorite African proverb is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So thank you.